David had been working at the security firm for exactly 3 months and 2 days. Not that anyone was counting. In fact, most of his co-workers had stopped noticing him altogether. He wasn't the type of guy who stood out in a crowd. Average height, maybe 5'8" on a good day. Thin build, the kind that made people assume he'd never seen the inside of a gym. He wore simple button-down shirts that were always neatly pressed, dark pants, and glasses that gave him a bookish appearance. His desk was organized to the point of being obsessive, with labeled folders and color-coded notes that his coworkers would sometimes joke about when they thought he couldn't hear. But David could always hear. He noticed everything. It was a habit he couldn't quite shake, even though he'd been trying for 6 months now. The office of Peterson Security Solutions was your typical corporate environment. Gray cubicles, fluorescent lighting that hummed just loud enough to be annoying, and a break room that always smelled like burnt coffee. David's cubicle was in the back corner, away from the windows, away from the chatter, away from everything. Exactly where he wanted to be. His co-workers were a mixed bunch. There was Rita, the office manager, who actually treated him with basic human decency. She'd smile and ask how his weekend was, even though David's weekends were usually spent alone, reading or taking long walks in the park. Then there was Tom from accounting, who was too busy with his own work to bother anyone. David appreciated Tom's indifference. But then there was Kyle. Kyle Thompson was everything David wasn't, or at least everything Kyle thought David wasn't. 6'2", built like someone who'd never missed a day at the gym in his life. He had that loud, confident energy that filled up every room he walked into. Kyle had played college football, and he made sure everyone knew it. His desk was covered with trophies and team photos, and he wore his varsity ring like it was a medal of honor. Kyle worked as a field consultant, the same position David had been hired for. But while Kyle got sent to meet with clients and assess high-profile security situations, David was usually stuck reviewing paperwork, checking surveillance footage, and updating database entries. The boring stuff. The stuff nobody else wanted to do. It had been this way since David's first week. Their boss, Mr. Harrison, was a decent enough guy, but he made judgments quickly. During David's interview, he'd seemed uncertain. David could see it in his eyes, the way he looked at David's thin frame and quiet demeanor and wondered if he'd made a mistake calling him in. But David's resume was impressive, at least on paper, so Mr. Harrison had given him a chance. That chance had mostly involved sitting at a desk. Kyle never missed an opportunity to remind David of his place in the office hierarchy. It started small. Comments here and there. "Hey, David, maybe leave the heavy lifting to someone who can actually lift heavy things." Or, "Don't strain yourself with that file box, buddy. I'd hate to see you throw out your back." The other consultants would laugh, not because the jokes were particularly funny, but because Kyle had that kind of presence. When he laughed, others felt obligated to join in. David never responded. He'd just nod slightly, sometimes offer a small smile and go back to whatever he was doing. This only seemed to encourage Kyle more. The breaking point came during a Monday morning meeting. The whole team was crammed into the small conference room, sitting around a scratched wooden table with coffee cups and notepads scattered everywhere. Mr. Harrison stood at the front, clicking through a presentation about their newest client, a tech company downtown that had been receiving threatening messages. "This is a big opportunity for us," Mr. Harrison explained, his tie slightly crooked as he gestured at the screen. "They want a complete security assessment. Physical vulnerabilities, digital systems, personnel protocols, everything." Kyle leaned back in his chair, arms crossed with that confident smirk he always wore. "Sounds right up my alley, sir. I can handle this one personally." Mr. Harrison nodded. "I was thinking you'd take the lead on the field assessment. Kyle, Rita can help coordinate the scheduling, and Tom will handle the financial side." He paused, glancing at David. "David, I'll need you to go through their building schematics and access logs. Look for any patterns or irregularities in their security systems." David nodded. "Of course." Kyle snorted, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "No offense, David, but shouldn't you be behind a desk somewhere? I mean, this is a security firm. We deal with real threats, not spreadsheets." The room went quiet. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Rita shot Kyle a disapproving look, but she didn't say anything. Nobody ever really did. David looked at Kyle for a moment, his expression calm and unreadable. "None taken," he said quietly, then turned his attention back to Mr. Harrison. But Kyle wasn't done. He leaned forward, warming to his audience. I'm serious though, boss. When clients see our team, they need to feel safe, you know? They need to see people who look like they can actually handle a threat. No disrespect to David, but he looks like he'd blow over in a strong wind. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. David remained perfectly still, his hands folded on the table in front of him. His face showed nothing. No anger, no embarrassment, no reaction whatsoever. This was the thing about David that nobody understood. He'd been called worse things in worse places by far more dangerous people. A guy like Kyle sitting in a comfortable office chair making jokes about his appearance, barely registered as an annoyance. It was just noise. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to start a conflict. Right, well, everyone has their strengths. Let's just focus on the job, shall we? The meeting continued, but the energy had shifted. David took notes in his precise handwriting, documenting everything Mr. Harrison said about the client and their concerns. He noticed things others missed, details buried in the presentation that would matter later. The client's building layout, the timing of the threats, the specific language used in the messages. After the meeting ended, everyone filed out except David, who stayed behind to gather his notes. Kyle paused at the doorway, unable to resist one more jab. Hey, David, if you need help carrying those heavy papers back to your desk, just let me know. David looked up and smiled politely. I'll manage. Thanks anyway. As Kyle walked away laughing, David allowed himself a single deep breath. In another life, in another place, things would have been different. But that life was over. He'd chosen this path deliberately, chosen to be underestimated, chosen to be invisible. It was safer this way, quieter. What Kyle and the others didn't know, what David had never told anyone at Peterson Security Solutions, was that he'd spent the last 12 years doing things that would give them nightmares. He'd operated in places where the wrong move meant death, where silence wasn't just golden but necessary for survival, where being underestimated was often the only advantage you had. David gathered his notes and walked back to his corner desk. He had work to do, and unlike Kyle's flashy presentations and loud confidence, David's work actually mattered. He could already see problems in the client's security setup that nobody else had noticed. Patterns that suggested something bigger was happening. But he'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to help was to stay quiet and let others think they were in charge. At least until the moment when quiet wasn't enough anymore. That moment, though David didn't know it yet, was coming very soon. The tech company was called Apex Digital, and their headquarters building was one of those sleek downtown towers with too much glass and not enough substance. David arrived with the team on a Wednesday morning, carrying his laptop bag and a notebook that looked like it had seen better days. Kyle pulled up in his truck, music blaring, and hopped out wearing aviator sunglasses and a polo shirt that showed off his gym routine. He looked like he was ready for a photo shoot, not a security assessment. The rest of the team followed, Rita with her tablet and Tom looking already exhausted even though the day had just started. Mr. Harrison met them in the lobby, shaking hands with Apex's operations manager, a stressed-looking woman named Jennifer who kept checking her phone every 30 seconds. She led them through security, past the modern art installations and the reception desk made of reclaimed wood, up to the executive floor. We've been getting these messages for 3 weeks now, Jennifer explained as they walked. At first we thought it was just spam or someone messing around. But they're getting more specific. More detailed. Kyle jumped right in, his voice booming through the quiet hallway. Don't worry, ma'am. We'll get this sorted out. I've handled dozens of cases like this. Usually it's just some kid in his basement trying to sound scary. David said nothing. He was looking at the ceiling, the walls, the placement of security cameras. Jennifer noticed his attention and seemed puzzled by his silence. But Kyle quickly drew her focus back with more reassuring comments and war stories from previous jobs. They spent the morning touring the building. Kyle pointed out obvious things. Doors that should be locked. Areas where cameras didn't quite cover every angle. He took photos with his phone and made comments about upgrading the physical barriers and improving the perimeter defense. It all sounded impressive if you didn't actually know what you were looking at. David walked slowly, deliberately, taking in everything. He noticed that the maintenance closet on the 3rd floor had a lock that looked brand new, while all the others were older models. He saw that one of the stairwell cameras had been adjusted recently, the dust pattern on its mounting bracket showing fresh fingerprints. Small things. Details that didn't quite add up. During lunch, while Kyle entertained everyone with stories about his college football days, David excused himself and asked Jennifer if he could review the digital access logs. She seemed surprised that he'd want to spend his lunch break working, but she set him up in an empty conference room with access to their security system. For the next hour, David scrolled through data that would make most people's eyes glaze over. Entry times, badge swipes, maintenance requests, vendor access codes. He pulled up a spreadsheet and started organizing the information, looking for patterns the way someone else might look for faces in clouds. And there it was, a maintenance badge number that had been used 17 times in the past 2 weeks, always during late evening hours, always in areas that didn't need any maintenance according to the official work orders. The badge belonged to a contracted cleaning company, but the access times didn't match up with the cleaning schedule. Someone was using that credential to move through the building, and they were being very careful about it. David sat back in his chair, thinking, this wasn't random. This wasn't some kid sending threats from his bedroom. Someone was doing reconnaissance, mapping out the building, learning its patterns. The threatening messages were probably just noise, meant to distract from what was really happening. He needed to tell someone. David found Kyle on the 4th floor, pointing at a window and explaining to Jennifer why they needed better sensors. Mr. Harrison was nodding along, taking notes. Kyle, can I talk to you for a second? David asked quietly. Kyle barely glanced at him. Kinda busy here, David. Can it wait? It's about the access logs. I found something. Access logs? Kyle laughed. Dude, we're doing the actual security assessment right now. You can file your report later, David persisted. Someone's been using a maintenance credential to access the building during off hours. The pattern suggests they're— Hold on, Kyle interrupted, turning to face him now. You think some janitor working late is our big threat here? It's not matching the cleaning schedule, David explained, keeping his voice level. The locations don't make sense for maintenance work. Someone's been systematically accessing different parts of the building. Kyle exchanged a look with Mr. Harrison, who seemed uncertain. Jennifer's phone buzzed again, and she stepped away to take a call. David, Kyle said in that condescending tone he reserved for moments like this, I appreciate that you're trying to contribute here, but you're overthinking it. Cleaning crews work weird hours. Maybe they're behind schedule. Maybe they're doing deep cleaning or something. This is why field work isn't really your thing, man. You get caught up in the details and miss the big picture. I'm looking at 17 separate instances over 2 weeks, David said. That's not random. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. David, why don't you write up your findings and we'll review them back at the office? Kyle's assessment is what the client is paying for right now. It wasn't worth arguing. David had learned that lesson a long time ago. When people didn't want to hear something, no amount of evidence would convince them, not until it was too late. He nodded and went back to the conference room. For the rest of the afternoon, while Kyle continued his theatrical security assessment, David dug deeper. He cross-referenced employee schedules, security footage timestamps, and maintenance requests. The picture that emerged made his stomach tighten with a familiar feeling, one he hadn't felt in 6 months. Someone was planning something. The threatening messages were just theater. The real threat was these unauthorized access points, these careful reconnaissance missions. Whoever was doing this knew what they were doing. They had training, patience, discipline. David pulled up the building's architectural plans and started marking the locations where the mystery badge had been used. When he connected the dots, a pattern emerged. They weren't random locations. They were strategic: emergency exits, server rooms, executive offices, security control centers. This was a pre-operational surveillance. Someone was preparing for an intrusion. By the time the team wrapped up for the day, David had compiled a detailed report with timestamps, access patterns, and potential vulnerabilities. He'd even pulled security footage showing a figure in maintenance coveralls moving through restricted areas, always keeping their face away from cameras. In the parking lot, as everyone loaded into their vehicles, David approached Mr. Harrison one more time. Sir, I really think we need to take this seriously. The evidence suggests— David, Mr. Harrison said, clearly tired and ready to go home. I appreciate your thoroughness, I really do. But Kyle's been doing this for years. If there was a real threat, he'd have spotted it. Send me your report and we'll discuss it at the office tomorrow. David watched them drive away, Kyle's truck leading the convoy with its stereo shaking the windows. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking back at the Apex building. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the glass facade. He knew what he'd seen. He knew what it meant. In his old life, this would have been the moment when his team mobilized, when they'd set up counter-surveillance and prepared for contact. But this wasn't his old life. He was just David now, the quiet guy with the desk job who everyone thought was overthinking things. Still, as he drove home that evening, David couldn't shake the feeling. Something was coming. Something bad. And when it arrived, Kyle's confidence and Mr. Harrison's faith in obvious solutions wouldn't mean anything. David had seen this pattern before, in places far more dangerous than a downtown office building. He'd seen what happened when people ignored the warning signs because they didn't fit their expectations. He pulled into his apartment parking lot and sat in his car for a moment, staring at nothing. Part of him wanted to let it go, to file his report and let the cards fall where they may. That's what normal people did. That's what he'd promised himself he'd do when he left his old life behind. But another part of him, the part that 12 years of training had burned into his bones, wouldn't let him walk away. Not when he could see what was coming. Not when people might get hurt because everyone was too busy looking at the obvious threats to see the real danger lurking in the data. David pulled out his laptop. If no one else was going to take this seriously, he'd have to investigate on his own. It was probably nothing. Probably just paranoia from too many years in a world where everyone was a potential threat, but probably wasn't good enough. Not anymore. David couldn't sleep. He'd been lying in bed for 2 hours, staring at the ceiling of his small apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. His mind kept running through the access logs, the patterns, the footage of that figure in maintenance coveralls who moved just a little too deliberately, a little too aware of camera angles. At 11:30, he gave up trying to rest. He made coffee, bitter and black, and opened his laptop at the kitchen table. The security system at Apex Digital had given him remote monitoring access for his assessment work. He pulled up the live feeds, cycling through different cameras out of habit more than expectation. Everything looked normal. Empty hallways, dark offices, the night security guard at the front desk scrolling through his phone. Just another quiet Wednesday night in a downtown office building. David was about to close the laptop when something caught his eye. Camera 12, third floor, southwest stairwell. The motion sensor had triggered for just a moment, then nothing. Probably nothing. Could have been anything. He watched for another minute. Nothing moved. Then camera 15 flickered. Just for a second, the feed went to static before coming back online. David's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. That wasn't normal. Security cameras didn't just glitch like that unless someone was interfering with them. He pulled up the building's full camera grid, watching multiple feeds at once. There, camera 18, fourth floor. Another brief interruption. Then camera 21. Someone was moving through the building and they were systematically disrupting cameras as they went. David's heart rate didn't spike. It didn't pound. Instead, it settled into that steady, controlled rhythm he knew too well. His mind shifted gears, moving from civilian David to someone else, someone he'd been trying to leave behind. He grabbed his phone and called Mr. Harrison. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. He tried Kyle next. Straight to voicemail. Rita didn't answer either. It was late. They were all asleep. And David didn't have time to convince anyone of what he was seeing. On the screen, he watched as another camera went dark. Whoever was in that building was heading upward, floor by floor. And then David saw something that made his blood run cold. Camera 32, the executive floor. There was someone still in the building. Jennifer, the operations manager, was in her office. He could see the light under her door, see her shadow moving inside. She was working late, probably catching up on emails, completely unaware that 3 people with very bad intentions were moving toward her floor. 3 people. David had counted them now from the brief glimpses on camera. They moved in a tactical formation, covering each other, communicating with hand signals. These weren't random thieves. This was a team, David didn't think. Thinking was for people who had options. He grabbed his keys and ran. His car was 6 years old and made a rattling sound when he pushed it above 60, but it got him downtown in 12 minutes. He parked 2 blocks away from the Apex building, something he did automatically even though he wasn't sure why maintaining distance mattered anymore. Old habits. The front entrance was locked, but David had badge access from the security assessment. He considered his options for exactly 3 seconds, then made his decision. He couldn't call the police and try to explain what he'd seen on remote security feeds while sitting at home. By the time they arrived and verified the threat, it might be too late. He entered through the side maintenance entrance, the one he'd memorized during the building tour. The hallway was dark except for emergency lighting. David moved quickly but quietly, his footsteps making almost no sound. Another old habit. The building felt different at night, bigger, more maze-like. But David had studied the layout until he could walk it with his eyes closed. He knew exactly where those 3 people would be heading: the executive floor, the server room, or maybe Jennifer herself. He took the stairs instead of the elevator, moving up 2 steps at a time but staying light on his feet. On the 3rd-floor landing, he paused, listened. There were voices above him, hushed and urgent. David couldn't make out the words, but he could hear the tone. Professional, controlled, military or ex-military if he had to guess. One of them was coming back down. David could hear footsteps descending. He had maybe 10 seconds to decide what to do. The stairwell door on the 2nd floor was right there. David could slip through it, avoid contact, call the police from a safe distance. That's what a normal person would do. That's what David, the security consultant, should do. But David wasn't just a security consultant. He'd never really been just that. The footsteps got closer. David positioned himself behind the stairwell door, in the blind spot he'd noticed during his assessment. The man came around the corner, dressed in dark clothing, wearing a communications earpiece. He had something in his hand. David couldn't see exactly what, but the way the man held it, the weight of it, told him everything he needed to know. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. David moved out from behind the door with speed that didn't seem possible for someone his size. The man started to turn, started to raise his hand, but he was already too late. David hit him in exactly the right spot with exactly the right amount of force. Not too much, just enough. The man crumpled without making a sound. David caught him before he hit the ground, lowered him carefully, checked his pulse. Still breathing. Good. He'd wake up in an hour with a headache and a lot of questions. David searched him quickly, professionally. No ID, burner phone. The weapon was a high-end taser, not a gun. Interesting, they weren't here to kill anyone. This was an extraction or a theft, something that required Jennifer or something in her office. He used the man's own zip ties to secure his hands and feet, then dragged him into a storage closet. The man's radio crackled softly. A voice, distorted and quiet. Status check, report. David didn't respond. The silence would tell them something was wrong soon enough. He continued up the stairs, moving faster now. The element of surprise was gone. The other 2 would know their partner was compromised. They'd either abort or escalate. David was betting on escalate. On the 4th floor, he heard it. A loud bang, wood splintering. They were breaking into Jennifer's office. David moved down the hallway, staying close to the wall using the shadows. Through the glass partition, he could see Jennifer backing away from her door, her face pale with fear, phone in her hand. The door burst open. 2 figures entered her office. Jennifer screamed and backed against the window. Please, she was saying. Please, I don't know what you want. Just take whatever. Where is it? One of them demanded. Male voice, rough. The drive. The backup drive. We know you have it. So that's what this was about. Corporate espionage. Someone wanted data, and they wanted it badly enough to break in with military precision and threaten an innocent person. David assessed the situation the way he'd been trained to. 2 targets, both armed with tasers. One blocking the door. One approaching Jennifer. 8 feet between them. Windows behind Jennifer, but they were sealed. No other exits. He could wait for the police. Jennifer had probably already triggered a silent alarm. Help was coming. But in 2 minutes, a lot could go wrong. Someone could get hurt. Someone could make a stupid decision that turned a theft into something much worse. David made his choice. He stepped into the doorway. Hey, he said quietly. Both men spun toward him. For a moment, nobody moved. They saw what everyone always saw. A thin guy with glasses wearing jeans and a jacket, looking completely out of place in this situation. Who the hell are you? The closer one demanded. Building security. David lied smoothly. You should leave now. The man actually laughed. Your security? You look like an accountant. Get out of here before you get hurt. David didn't move. Last chance. Walk away. The man closest to him raised his taser. I'm not going to tell you again. Neither am I, David said, and then he moved. What Jennifer would later tell the police was that it happened so fast, she barely understood what she was seeing. One moment, the thin, quiet man from the security company was standing in the doorway. The next moment, he was somehow inside the room, and the man with the taser was on the ground unconscious, the weapon skittering across the floor. The second man barely had time to react before David was on him too. This one put up more of a fight, training kicking in, but it didn't matter. In 10 seconds, it was over. Both intruders were on the ground, secured, neutralized. David stood in the center of the office, breathing normally, looking like he'd just finished a casual walk. Jennifer stared at him with her mouth open, her back still pressed against the window. Are you okay? David asked. His voice was calm, gentle even, like nothing unusual had just happened. How did you? Jennifer couldn't form a complete sentence. In the distance, sirens wailed, getting closer. David walked to the window and looked down at the street. 3 police cars, lights flashing, pulling up to the building. The police are here, he said. You're safe now. Jennifer finally found her voice. Who are you, really? David turned to look at her. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something old and distant. Then it was gone, and he was just David again, the quiet guy from the security firm. Just someone who was paying attention, he said simply. The police officers came through the door with their weapons drawn, shouting commands. David immediately raised his hand, stepping away from the 2 unconscious men on the floor. He knew the drill. He'd been on the other side of situations like this enough times to know exactly how to move, exactly what to say, exactly how to not get shot. I'm unarmed, he said calmly, clearly. My name is David Chen. I work for Peterson Security Solutions. I was monitoring the building remotely and saw the intrusion. Jennifer was crying now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. A female officer moved to her side, guiding her away from the window, asking if she was hurt. Jennifer kept shaking her head, kept looking back at David like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. More officers flooded the room. They secured the 2 intruders, checked the third one David had left in the storage closet on the 2nd floor. Paramedics arrived, checked everyone over. David sat patiently in a chair in the hallway, answering questions from a detective who kept looking at him with a strange expression. So let me get this straight, the detective said, flipping through his notepad. You're a security consultant. You saw suspicious activity on the building's camera system from your home. You drove here instead of calling 911, and you single-handedly took down 3 trained intruders. Yes, sir, David said simply. How exactly did you do that? David shrugged. I've had some training. The detective was about to ask another question when one of the officers called him over. They spoke in low voices, and the detective kept glancing back at David. When he returned, his expression had changed. More curious now, more respectful. Officer Rodriguez over there says he recognizes your movement patterns, says you move like special operations. David said nothing. It wasn't really a question. Are you military? The detective pressed. I was, David admitted, a long time ago. Before the detective could dig deeper, Mr. Harrison burst through the stairwell door, followed by Kyle and Rita. They must have been called by the police. Mr. Harrison looked disheveled, like he'd thrown on clothes in a hurry. Kyle was wearing sweatpants and a college football t-shirt. Rita had her hair in a messy bun. They all stopped dead when they saw David sitting there, surrounded by police, while handcuffed suspects were being led away in the background. David, Mr. Harrison said, confused. What are you doing here? He's the one who stopped them, the detective explained. Took down all 3 suspects by himself. Kyle's mouth actually fell open. He what? The detective gestured toward Jennifer's office. The suspects broke in looking for proprietary data. They were in the process of threatening Ms. Chen when your employee here intervened. From what we can tell, he neutralized all 3 threats in under 2 minutes. That's impossible, Kyle said, looking at David like he'd never seen him before. He's just what? Officer Rodriguez stepped forward and David recognized something in his bearing immediately. Military. probably Marine Corps, based on the way he stood. This man moved with more precision than most SWAT officers I've seen. Whatever training he had, it was elite level. Rita was staring at David with wide eyes. Mr. Harrison seemed to be struggling to process what he was hearing, but Kyle's expression was the most interesting. Shock, disbelief, and something else, maybe embarrassment. David, Mr. Harrison finally said, "Is this true? Do you have some kind of special training?" David met his boss's eyes. He'd kept this quiet for so long. He'd wanted to leave that life behind, to be normal, to just be another guy doing a regular job. But the truth had a way of coming out, especially when you use skills that most people didn't have. "I served for 12 years, David said quietly. "Special Forces. I retired 6 months ago." The hallway went silent. Even the officers nearby stopped what they were doing to listen. "Special Forces," Kyle repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're telling me you were Special Ops?" "Yes. And you didn't think that was worth mentioning when you applied for a job at a security firm?" Mr. Harrison asked, though his tone wasn't angry. More stunned. "I wanted to leave that behind," David explained. "I wanted a normal job. A quiet life. I thought if people knew, they'd treat me differently. They'd expect me to be someone I was trying not to be anymore." Rita spoke up for the first time. "That's why you always knew things nobody else noticed." "The details. The patterns," David nodded. "Old habits. I can't really turn it off even when I want to." Kyle ran his hand through his hair, looking like someone had just told him the sky was green. All the things I said." "You didn't know," David said simply. "But I should have respected you anyway," Kyle said, and there was genuine regret in his voice. "I was a jerk. I judged you based on how you looked, based on—" "God, I'm an idiot." The detective cleared his throat. "We're going to need full statements from everyone. Ms. Chen is being taken to the hospital for observation, though she appears to be physically fine. Mr. Chen, you'll need to come down to the station." "Of course," David said. "But for the record," the detective added, "what you did here tonight probably saved that woman's life. Those suspects were escalating. Things could have gone very wrong very fast. You should be proud." David didn't feel proud. He felt tired, and a little sad that the quiet life he'd been building had just shattered. By tomorrow, everyone at Peterson Security would know. By next week, it would probably spread beyond the company. The thin guy with glasses who nobody took seriously was actually a decorated special operations veteran. It was almost 3 in the morning by the time David finished at the police station. Mr. Harrison had waited for him, insisting on giving him a ride home even though David said he could take a cab. They sat in silence for the first few minutes of the drive. Finally, Mr. Harrison spoke. "Why didn't you tell me? During the interview, on your resume, any time in the past 3 months. Would you have hired me if you knew?" David asked. Mr. Harrison thought about it. "Honestly, I probably would have assumed you were overqualified, that you'd get bored and leave." "Exactly. I didn't want special treatment. I didn't want to be seen as the military guy. I just wanted to do good work and help people without all the intensity. And instead, I had you filing paperwork while Kyle handled the real assignments." "I didn't mind the paperwork," David said, and he meant it. It was peaceful. Mr. Harrison pulled up to David's apartment building. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have paid more attention. Your analysis about those access logs, you were right. About everything. And I dismissed you. You're not the first person to underestimate me," David said with a slight smile. "I'm kind of used to it. Well, things are going to be different now. Jennifer already called me. Apex wants you to personally overhaul their entire security system. They're willing to pay 3 times what they were before, and I suspect other clients will feel the same way once word gets out." David sighed. "So much for quiet and normal." "There's something else," Mr. Harrison continued. "I pulled your military file. Well, the parts I could access. Most of it's classified. But what I could see, David, you have medals, commendations. You served in places most people can't even pronounce. Why give all that up for a desk job at a small security firm?" David was quiet for a moment, looking out at his apartment building, at the normal suburban street with its normal cars and normal lives. "Because I spent 12 years in a world where one mistake meant someone died, where trust was life or death and violence was just another Tuesday. I saw things, did things that I can't talk about and wouldn't want to. And when my contract was up, I realized I had a choice. I could stay in that world, keep being that person, Or I could try to be someone else, someone quieter, someone whose biggest problem was filing reports and attending boring meetings. And then tonight happened. Yeah, David said. Tonight happened. And I did what I was trained to do, because someone needed help and I was there. I don't regret it. I'd do it again, but it doesn't mean I want to go back to being that person all the time. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. I think I understand. For what it's worth, you can be whoever you want to be at Peterson Security, though I suspect Kyle won't be making any more comments about desk jobs. David smiled at that. He's not a bad guy. Just loud, he's embarrassed. And he should be. We all should be. We judged you based on surface appearances, and we were completely wrong. David opened the car door. Most people do. It's human nature. We make assumptions based on what we can see. It's not always wrong, just incomplete. Well, you taught us all a lesson tonight, Mr. Harrison said. Get some rest. Take tomorrow off. We'll figure everything else out later. David walked to his apartment, exhausted but unable to sleep. He made coffee again and sat at his kitchen table looking at his laptop. The news was already reporting the incident. Security consultant thwarts corporate espionage. His name wasn't mentioned yet, but it would be soon. His phone buzzed. A text from Kyle. Hey man, I owe you a serious apology. And probably a beer, or 12. You're a genuine hero and I was a complete jerk. I'm sorry, David typed back. Apology accepted. Hold the hero label. Just did what needed doing. Another text came through, this time from Rita. You were always so quiet. Now I know why. You didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Respect. David set his phone down and looked out his window at the sunrise beginning to paint the sky. His quiet life was over. That was clear. But maybe that was okay. Maybe he could find a balance between the person he'd been and the person he wanted to be. He'd saved someone tonight. That had to count for something. David didn't take the day off. He showed up to the office at his usual time, carrying his usual coffee, wearing his usual button-down shirt and glasses. But when he walked through the door, everything was different. The entire office went quiet. Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to look at him. For a long, uncomfortable moment, nobody said anything. Then Rita started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Tom from accounting joined in. Then the others. Within seconds, the entire office was applauding. David stood there, frozen, his face turning slightly red. This was exactly what he'd been trying to avoid. The attention, the recognition. The pedestal that people put you on when they found out you'd done something extraordinary. All right, he said, raising his hands. Can we please just go back to normal? I've got reports to file. But normal was gone and everyone knew it. Mr. Harrison called an emergency meeting within an hour. The small conference room was packed, people standing along the walls because there weren't enough chairs. David sat in his usual spot trying to be invisible, but every eye in the room was on him. I'm sure everyone has heard about what happened last night, Mr. Harrison began. David put himself in danger to protect a client and successfully stopped a serious threat. Because of his actions, Jennifer from Apex is safe and the suspects are in custody. More applause. David kept his eyes down, studying the scratches on the conference table. But that's not why I called this meeting. Mr. Harrison continued. I called it because I owe David an apology. We all do. For 3 months, we underestimated him. We judged him based on his appearance and his quiet demeanor. We gave him desk work while others got the high-profile assignments. That changes today. Kyle, sitting across from David, spoke up. His voice was different than usual. Quieter, more humble. I especially owe you an apology, David. I was a complete jerk. I made assumptions and jokes and treated you like you didn't belong here. The truth is, you're probably the most qualified person in this room, and I was too stupid to see it. David finally looked up. Kyle, you don't have to. Yes, I do, Kyle interrupted. I need to own it. I disrespected you and you never once fired back. You never put me in my place even though you clearly could have. That takes more strength than anything I've ever done. The room was silent. David could see genuine remorse in Kyle's eyes and something else. Respect. Real respect, not the fake kind people gave because they felt obligated. I appreciate that, David said quietly. But here's the thing everyone needs to understand. I didn't come here to be special. I came here to be normal. Yes, I have training. Yes, I can do things that most people can't. But that doesn't define who I want to be now. I left that life because I was tired of being the guy who had to be ready for violence at any moment. I wanted to be the guy who filed reports and reviewed camera footage and went home at 5 o'clock. Rita leaned forward. But you're not that guy anymore. Not after last night. The whole city knows what you did. I know, David said, and there was a hint of sadness in his voice. I know, Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. David, I won't force you into anything you don't want, but Apex Digital wants to hire you specifically for a complete security overhaul. They're offering a substantial contract, and I've had 3 other companies call this morning asking if you'd be available for consultations. Your expertise is valuable, not just your training, but your ability to see things others miss. David thought about it. He could refuse. He could insist on staying in his quiet corner with his paperwork and his organized desk. But would that be honest? Would that be fair to the people who needed real security, not just the appearance of it? I'll do the Apex contract, David finally said, but on my terms. I'm not looking to be anyone's hero or celebrity consultant. I'll assess their security, train their people, and make sure they're protected. That's it. That's more than enough, Mr. Harrison said, smiling. Over the next few weeks, David's life changed in ways he hadn't expected. The Apex contract was extensive, requiring him to completely redesign their security protocols. Jennifer, who had recovered from her ordeal, insisted on working directly with him. She trusted him in a way she couldn't trust anyone else. You saved my life, she told him during one of their meetings. Those men, they were getting aggressive. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there. Someone else would have helped, David said, uncomfortable with the gratitude. But they didn't. You did. You risked your own safety for someone you barely knew. That means something. David implemented security measures at Apex that were practical but sophisticated. Nothing flashy, nothing obvious, but effective. He trained their security team personally, teaching them not just procedures but awareness, how to spot patterns, how to read behavior, how to think 3 steps ahead. Back at Peterson Security, things had shifted too. Kyle had become David's closest ally, often deferring to his judgment on cases. The loud, overconfident guy from before had been replaced by someone more thoughtful, someone who asked questions instead of assuming he knew the answers. One afternoon, Kyle knocked on David's cubicle wall. Hey, got a minute? David looked up from his computer. Sure. Kyle sat down, looking unusually serious. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about wanting to be normal, about leaving your old life behind, and I realized something. What's that? You can't really leave it behind. Not completely. It's part of who you are. But that doesn't mean you have to be that person all the time. You can be both. The quiet guy who likes organized filing systems and the guy who can take down 3 trained intruders. They're not separate. They're both you. David was quiet for a moment. That's pretty insightful, Kyle. I've been in therapy, Kyle admitted with a sheepish smile. Turns out I had some stuff to work through. Insecurity, mainly. I was loud because I was afraid of being invisible. You were comfortable being invisible because you knew exactly who you were. I envied that, even if I didn't realize it. Therapy's good, David said. More people should try it. Yeah, well, you inspired me. If someone as genuinely tough as you can be humble and quiet, maybe I don't need to be so loud all the time. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Kyle stood up. Anyway, a few of us are getting dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just burgers. You should come. David hesitated. The old him would have made an excuse, would have gone home alone to his quiet apartment. But Kyle was right. He couldn't completely leave his old life behind, but he also couldn't pretend he was just a normal guy with a normal job anymore. He was something in between. And maybe that was okay. Sure, David said. I'll come. That evening, sitting in a crowded restaurant with Kyle, Rita, Tom, and a few others from the office, David felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like he belonged, not because of what he could do or what he'd done, but because these people knew who he was, all of it, and accepted him anyway. Kyle was telling a story about a security assessment gone wrong, making everyone laugh with his exaggerated gestures. Rita was showing photos of her new puppy. Tom was complaining about tax season. Normal things. Simple things. David sat back and listened, a small smile on his face. He'd spent 12 years in places where trust was rare and danger was constant. He'd done things that would give these people nightmares. But he'd also learned something important. Strength wasn't just about what you could survive or what you could do in a crisis. It was also about being vulnerable enough to let people in, To admit you wanted connection, wanted friendship, wanted to be part of something ordinary. "Hey, David," Kyle said, pulling him from his thoughts. "Tell them about the time you spotted that security flaw at the museum job. The one I completely missed." David shook his head, laughing. "You really want me to make you look bad? Too late for that. You've been making me look bad since day one. I just wasn't paying attention." Everyone laughed, including David. It felt good. Natural. Right. Later that night, walking to his car, David's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. He answered. "Is this David Chen?" a voice asked. Deep, authoritative, military. "Yes, this is Colonel Williams. I served with you in Afghanistan. Heard about what you did last week. That was good work. Thank you, sir. Listen, I won't take up your time. I just wanted to say I know you retired to get away from all this. But the skills you have, the instincts, they don't just disappear. You don't have to come back to the military, but don't waste what you are. The world needs people like you, even in civilian life." David looked up at the stars. "I'm trying to find a balance, sir, between who I was and who I want to be. That's all any of us can do, son. Sounds like you're doing just fine. Take care of yourself." The line went dead. David stood there for a moment, then got in his car. Tomorrow he'd go back to the office, work on the Apex contract, maybe review some camera footage, maybe train a security team. He'd be the quiet guy with the organized desk, but he'd also be the guy who could handle a crisis when it came. Both versions of himself, finding balance. As he drove home, David realized something. He'd been so focused on leaving his old life behind that he'd forgotten the most important part. He wasn't running from who he'd been. He was building on it, using those skills and experiences to help people in a different way. A quieter way, but still a meaningful way. He was still David Chen, former Special Forces. But now he was also just David, the security consultant who brought donuts on Fridays and organized the office supplies and had friends who knew both sides of him. And that was enough. More than enough. It was exactly who he wanted to be.